Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some fascinating research today about climate change, but with a twist.
A twist, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking at how it's playing out, how climate change is playing out in Pakistan, specifically focusing on food security and how folks are adapting.
That's right. And our source material, a real deep dive, Echoes of Survival is the title. And it's not just your typical, stats and figures kind of report.
Not at all. This one gets into the nitty-gritty, the real human stories behind the headlines.
Yeah, published in the Research on World Agricultural Economy journal, they took a grounded theory approach, which means talking to real people, internally displaced folks, women, smallholder farmers, all sorts of people, trying to understand the daily struggles, the choices they have to make.
So getting away from those big abstract ideas like food insecurity and actually seeing what it means to live that reality day in and day out.
Absolutely. And one thing that jumped out at me, the role of religion.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It's a double-edged sword, you see. It's a source of comfort, of course, but also maybe a factor in how people respond to the crisis.
I can see that. If you believe, for example, that Allah provides, does that make you less likely to change your farming methods, for instance, or to seek outside help?
That's one of the big questions the research explores. You see it in some of the quotes, too. Like, one person said, how can we think of fruits and meat when we don't have enough money to buy staple food? Deep faith, but also really tough choices.
Wow. But then you also have the story of Prophet Yusuf in the Quran, right? Didn't he actually encourage preparing for tough times?
He did. So it's not a simple equation. For some, faith might lead to acceptance, even fatalism, while for others, it's a source of guidance for action.
Makes you think, doesn't it? About how those beliefs play out in other cultures facing climate change, where faith and survival intersect.
It's a global conversation for sure, but it's not just religion. Cultural norms, traditions, they can also make adapting to these changes a lot more complex.
Yeah, the research talks about large families, for instance. Culturally valued, absolutely.
Yeah.
But when resources are already stretched thin.
It adds another layer of pressure,
Yeah.
definitely. More mouths to feed, less to go around. And then there's the issue of gender roles.
How so?
Well, women are often the ones managing the household, making sure everyone's fed, but they often lack the same rights as men. Inheritance laws, for example, often disadvantage women.
It's that intersectionality, isn't it? Climate change doesn't exist in a vacuum. It collides with these existing inequalities, amplifying them.
Exactly. There's a quote from one woman, "My father and brother didn't give me my right of land as I am a woman." Just like that. A stark reminder.
Wow. So we've got religion, culture, and then the actual physical impacts of climate change. What does that look like in the areas they studied?
Well, they focused on two districts, Dera Ismail Khan, which is prone to, well, really bad flooding.
Okay, so imagine like livestock being wiped out, homes destroyed, people displaced. It's a whole different level of crisis.
And then you have Banu, which is facing the opposite problem, droughts.
So parched land, failing crops, just as devastating, but in a slower, more drawn-out way.
It is a slow burn, but just as dangerous in terms of food security.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the impact on people's lives, on their sense of hope.
It is, but here's the thing. The research doesn't focus on despair. It looks at how people are actually responding, the coping mechanisms they're developing.
I'm intrigued. What are some of those strategies? How are people adapting to these really tough situations?
Well, it's a range, some more desperate than others. Some people end up having to sell assets like precious belongings or even land just to put food on the table. Just heartbreaking.
Ugh, that's rough. Just to survive. But I imagine there's also a lot of community support going on, people helping each other out.
Definitely. The researchers call it affordability optimization. Basically, switching to cheaper food, maybe cutting back on portions, stretching those budgets as far as they can go, sharing what they have.
A real sense of community in the face of hardship. It's inspiring in a way.
It is. And then there's migration. A lot of men, especially, leave their families to find work in cities, hoping to send money back.
A tough choice, though, to be separated from your loved ones. But sometimes, maybe the only option.
Right. And then there are those who stay and try to build resilience where they are, taking training courses in sustainable farming, starting small businesses, things like that.
It's amazing, actually, this sense of agency, even when things are so difficult. They're not just giving up.
Exactly. And that's one of the key takeaways here. Climate change isn't just this abstract concept. It's impacting real people, their families, their way of life, and they're finding ways to fight back, to adapt, to keep going.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
It's tough, though. All that adapting, all those coping mechanisms, they take a toll.
Yeah. It's easy to forget about the emotional side of things when you're focused on, just putting food on the table.
Right, right. But the research shows that food insecurity, it can really mess with people's mental well-being. Like there's a lot of shame involved.
Yeah. Families, they try to hide their struggles even from their neighbors because there's such a stigma attached to not having enough. They're afraid of being judged.
One woman, I remember reading this, she talked about she'd boil water on the stove to make it sound like she was cooking.
Oh, wow.
So her kids wouldn't know they were going hungry. And our kids sleep without food as we lie to them that we are cooking for them, she said. And she started crying as she was telling the researchers this. Just heartbreaking, you know?
It is. But it shows how far parents will go to protect their kids, even when they're, at their wits' end. And the stigma, it goes beyond individual families.
How so?
Well, the study found that internally displaced people, the ones who've lost everything in floods or conflicts, they face a lot of discrimination when they try to get help.
So it's not just about not having food, it's about being treated like you're somehow less worthy because of it.
Exactly. One woman described being treated like an animal, she said, at a food distribution point. The men got their rations first, and she was too scared to speak up.
It's like these existing power structures, these inequalities in society, they just get magnified when a crisis hits.
Absolutely. And the research also talks about the anger that people feel towards the government, the feeling of being abandoned, betrayed by the people who are supposed to be helping.
Yeah, there were a few quotes that really stood out. One person was talking about how politicians were like smuggling flour out of the country while people in their own community were starving. When we are dying of hunger and have no work, the government and these people engage in profit-making. There is no control or authority to stop them from this dirty, greedy business, they said.
It's that loss of faith, right? Not just in the system, but maybe even
In a higher power.
Yeah. If you believe that Allah is the provider, but you're still struggling to feed your family, it's got to create a real dissonance.
Makes you think about that story of Prophet Yusuf again. He was all about preparing for hard times, even while trusting in God's plan.
Right. It's about finding that balance, that middle ground, trusting in a higher power, but also taking responsibility for your own actions.
And that's what we're seeing in these communities, right? They're not just passively waiting for things to get better. They're actively finding ways to survive, to adapt.
That's the heart of it, I think, that incredible resilience. But it can't just be on individuals to figure this out. We need bigger solutions, system-level changes to really tackle this problem of climate-induced food insecurity.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin?
Well, first off, we have to acknowledge that this isn't just a them problem. Climate change is affecting food systems everywhere. And the underlying issues, things like poverty, inequality, access to resources, those are global too.
What's happening in Pakistan, it's a warning sign for all of us.
It is. So we need solutions that get to the root of the problem, not just Band-Aid fixes. Emergency aid is crucial, of course, but we also need long-term investments, sustainable agriculture, drought-resistant crops, better infrastructure to deal with floods.
And those solutions, they have to come from the communities themselves, right?
Right. Exactly. No more top-down approaches that don't take into account the local context, the cultural nuances. We need to work with people, not dictate to them.
Which means building trust, right?
Yeah,
Showing up for the long haul, not just swooping in with a quick fix.
it does. Invest in those relationships. Support local leaders. And look for the bright spots, those initiatives that are already making a difference at the community level. The seed banks, the water management systems, the training programs for women farmers, all that good stuff. Find those and scale them up.
So it's about like finding those glimmers of hope and fanning the flames.
Yeah, I like that. But we can't forget about the bigger picture either, the systemic issues, poverty, inequality, gender injustice. Those have to be addressed if we want to create a world where everyone can thrive in the face of climate change.
It's all connected, isn't it? It's not just an environmental crisis. It's a humanitarian one, a social justice one. It's a lot to take in, right? This whole issue. So much complexity. But I think for me, the big takeaway is, well, the resilience of those communities. They're facing these incredible challenges, yet they're still finding ways to not just survive, but to build a future.
And that's where the hope lies, not in pity, not in some kind of savior complex, but in recognizing that these communities have so much knowledge, so much strength. They're not waiting around to be rescued. They're out there, adapting, innovating, finding ways to make life work.
Which takes us back to that question we posed earlier.
Yeah.
If you were leading a climate adaptation project in one of these districts, Where would you even start? What have we learned from all this?
Well, I'd say the most important thing is humility. You can't go in with all the answers, assuming you know what people need. It has to start with listening, really listening, understanding the local context, the cultural stuff, the ways they're already coping.
So building on what's already there, not imposing some outside model.
Exactly, and recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. What works in Dura Ismail Khan, with all that flooding, might not make sense in Banu, where it's drought they're dealing with. You need flexible strategies, ones that are developed with the communities, not for them.
I imagine that takes a lot of trust, too. Building those relationships, showing that you're in it for the long haul.
It does. It's about partnership, not just, dropping in with a quick fix and then leaving. And it's about supporting local leaders, the folks who are already doing the work on the ground. The study talked about those community initiatives, the seed banks, the water management systems, the training programs. Those are the kinds of things we need to be investing in.
So it's about finding those bright spots, those successes, and figuring out how to replicate them in a way that's sustainable and makes sense culturally.
Exactly. And we can't forget about those bigger systemic issues we talked about. Poverty, inequality, gender injustice.
Yeah.
Those have to be part of the equation if we want to create a world where everyone can handle these climate challenges.
It's all connected, like we keep saying.
Yeah.
Climate change, it's not just an environmental crisis. It's a humanitarian one. It's a social justice one.
And it's a call to action for all of us, whether you're a politician, a researcher, an activist, or just someone who cares about this planet. We all have a role to play.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening, honestly. It's easy to get bogged down in the doom and gloom of climate change, but hearing these stories of resilience, of people helping each other out, it gives me hope. Hope that we can find a way forward together.
Me too. It's a reminder that even when things are tough, really tough, we humans, we find a way. We adapt, we innovate, we find those glimmers of hope, and we keep going.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought. What will your contribution be to this story of climate change and resilience that's still being written? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.